Now, let's take a look at types of argument structures. Now that we've talked about the types of arguments we use to persuade someone, it is time to start talking about how to build those arguments. This is especially true when you're trying to persuade your audience, since it can be difficult to change your audience's attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors, particularly those perspectives and habits that are long held and deeply seated. In addition to using evidence and strong delivery skills to establish ethos, and using narratives and connections to your audience experience to help establish pathos, you will want to use strong, well-developed arguments to help establish logos and to reinforce your ethos. The argument that you develop fall into one of two categories: inductive arguments and deductive arguments. To start, let's take a look at inductive arguments. Inductive arguments are arguments that use observations or small details or use specific instances of a phenomenon to make an argument about a more general or broad phenomenon. In an inductive argument, you are taking a small instance or situation and using it to generalize or make assumptions about what is true on a much larger scale. Inductive arguments use premises or statements about what has been observed and the assumed relationships between those observations to make probable conclusions. In other words, or simply put, inductive reasoning helps us draw conclusions about what is likely to be true, but it's still uncertain. Now, for example, you might use your own experience with a specific model of a car to make assumption about how reliable all cars of that particular brand are. Or you might use a symptom to make a diagnosis about an underlying medical condition. Or you might assume that the way that two things are related in one context can explain how they will be related in another context. There are 4 types of inductive arguments that you might decide to use: reasoning from sign, reasoning from example, reasoning from cause, and reasoning from analogy. First, let's take a look at reasoning from sign. Now, reasoning from sign involves using an observation or taking a small piece of evidence to make a generalization about a larger phenomenon that is occurring. You can also think about this as using a symptom to make an assumption about the broader situation that caused that symptom to occur, or viewing that symptom as a sign of something else. Now, for example, if you see people carrying umbrellas as they walk past your window, you might think that that is a sign that it is probably raining. If the thermometer tells you that you have a fever, you might use that symptom to diagnose that you probably have a flu. If you smell smoke, that might be a sign that there is probably a fire nearby. Now, all of these signs could be indicators of other conditions as well, but you are making assumptions about what situation is most likely to occur. The risk of reasoning by sign is that you could misdiagnose the larger condition that is being indicated by the symptom. Now, for example, it is possible that people are carrying umbrellas to protect themselves from the sun. Your fever is indicating you have an infection, and the smoke smell is coming from electrical wires overheating. When you are reasoning from a sign as a way to support your argument, make sure that you have considered all of the possible reasons that the sign might exist, and that you use qualifiers to help indicate the degree of confidence that you have in your conclusions about what that particular sign actually means. So double check and make sure you cover all the bases. Moving forward, let's take a look at reasoning from example. Now, reasoning from example involves using one or more specific cases to then generalize to other like or similar cases. This is sometimes also referred to as using anecdotes or anecdotal evidence, which is hearing about one person's experience and making assumptions about a lot of other people's experience for being similar. While examples help your audience visualize a broader phenomenon, and are sometimes an accurate reflection of the broader truth to which you are generalizing, it is very important to keep in mind that a single example or even multiple examples are not enough evidence to be certain of broader conclusions. Now, let's take a look at reasoning from cause. Reasoning from cause involves observing that two things tend to happen at the same time and making an assumption that one of them causes the other to occur. For example, you might notice that your body is a little sore after you do a hard workout, or that you feel a little better on days that you drink more water. If you assume that working out causes soreness or that drinking water makes you feel better, you are making a causal argument. To determine whether one thing might be causing the other, there are several issues that you should consider. The first is the order of events. The presumed cause might always happen before the effect, not after. Second, the effect must only occur in the presence of the presumed cause. If the presumed cause is sometimes present when the effect is observed, then the two things are not necessarily related. Finally, to be more certain of a causal relationship, the cause-effect relationship must be established through experimental research. When you are finding evidence to support your arguments, you will often try to make arguments about causal relationships for which experimental evidence is not yet available. So you are trying to convince your audience that there is a likelihood between the two particular relationships or events. It is important to keep in mind that correlations do not equate to causation, and that just because two things tend to happen at the same time, one doesn't necessarily cause the other. For example, when ice cream sales go up, so do forest fires. This doesn't mean that eating ice cream causes forest fires. Instead, there is an additional variable that is causing both of these phenomena to occur: warm weather. When it is warm, people are more likely to eat ice cream. People also tend to spend more time outside in public areas when it is warm, which also increases the likelihood of forest fires because more people are cooking over campfires and in drier conditions, which could, again, lead to forest fires. Now, let's take a look at reasoning from analogy. Reasoning from analogy involves comparing two similar situations or phenomenons and arguing that what is true for the first case should be true for the second one because of the similarities. An argument from an analogy often begins with a simile or metaphor that draws a comparison between two dissimilar things. When you transfer meaning from first situation to the second one and build a justification for why that conclusion is appropriate. For example, we sometimes talk about someone fighting a battle against a disease, implying that fighting a disease is like fighting a war. If one of the ways to win a war is to overwhelm the opponent with force and persistence in fighting until you have won, you might argue that, similarly, one way to win the battle against a disease is to overwhelm the disease with powerful drugs and to persist with treatments until the disease is gone. Likewise, you might compare the journey through college to a journey to the top of a mountain. Just as you will have moments when climbing is difficult, when you ache with exhaustion, when you want to give up, and when the top of the mountain is impossible to see as you climb, you will similarly have challenging moments when learning is hard, when you are exhausted, and when graduation seems impossibly far away as you work towards your degree. Just as you feel an exhilarating sense of pride and accomplishment when you finally reach the peak of the mountain and feel like all the work was worth it, it will feel even better when you reach graduation day and see all of the opportunities that are available to you because you have worked so hard and earned your degree. Now, let's take a look at deductive arguments. Whereas inductive arguments use specific details and observations to make generalizations about probably broader truths, deductive arguments do the opposite. A deductive argument starts with broader truths to start to draw a conclusion about a specific instance. Therefore, deductive arguments have more certain conclusions than inductive arguments. A deductive argument relies on an argument structure called syllogism, which is made up of three parts: a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion. Now, the major premise is a broad statement of a truth that the audience is likely to agree is true. Now, the minor premise is a statement drawing a connection between that broader truth and a specific instance about which you are making an argument. And the conclusion is the argument that you're making. Now, for example, the following set of three statements make up a syllogism. The major premise: all cars have four wheels. Minor premise: a Toyota Corolla is a type of car. And now the conclusion: a Toyota Corolla has four wheels. This syllogism is an example of categorical syllogism because it relies on the inclusion of the specific instance, such as the Toyota Corolla, in a broader category, which are cars, to make an argument about the nature of a specific instance. Another type of syllogism is disjunctive syllogism, which makes an either-or argument about which type of category to which something might belong. In this type of syllogism, the speaker makes an argument based on mutually exclusive categories that exist and draws a conclusion based on whether the specific individual fits into one category or another. Major premise: in the classroom, everyone is either a student or teacher. Minor premise: George is not the teacher. Conclusion: therefore, George must be a student. A third type of syllogism, a conditional syllogism, relies on if-then logic and argues that one thing will cause another thing to happen. For example, the following syllogism draws its conclusions from an argument about a casual relationship. Major premise: if I study a lot, I will earn a good grade on my test. Minor premise: I studied for many hours to prepare for today's test. Conclusion: therefore, I expect to earn a good grade on this test. In these types of syllogism, you are making logical arguments that follow a sort of mathematical formula. Deductive arguments like these have a higher chance of certainty and can be a stronger way to support your arguments. However, a deductive argument is only as sound as its premises. If any of the premises are false or uncertain, the conclusions cannot be relied upon either.